Good morning. I am Brian Nelson, Vice President of Institutional Advancement at Dunwoody College of Technology. Welcome to our first virtual LEAD speaker series. We rebranded the speaker series to better reflect the impact on our students, alumni, and community. LEAD is an acronym for Lead, Educate, Accomplish, and Discover. Also important to everything we do at Dunwoody. First, I want to thank you for joining us this morning for this virtual event. I want to remind you that all attendees are in a listen and view only mode, which means you will not be able to activate your webcam or your microphone. You will be able to use the Q&A feature to post questions for the Q&A session after the presentation. So if you have a question for Brian following the presentation or during the presentation, please feel free to put that in the Q&A section, and then we'll answer those questions at the end of the session. It is my great pleasure today to welcome and introduce Brian Gora, a speaker and consultant with Conversion-omics. Brian is a former U.S. Army aviation officer, combat veteran, business owner, and career Fortune 500 global senior executive. He has nearly 40 years of leadership experience, beginning in the U.S. military and continuing as a C-suite executive, primarily in the aerospace industry. He has also served as a CEO in the medical services industry and COO in the electronics manufacturing industry. Currently, Brian is the owner and president of Space Trailers, a veteran-owned small business, and speaker and consultant for Conversion-omics. To bring his passion for great leadership to others, Brian has developed and launched an exceedingly successful leadership academy to teach critical leadership skills to leaders at all levels. A high-energy leader, consultant, and speaker, Brian uses his unique military, aviation, and global business perspectives to deliver highly genuine, compelling, and motivating workshops and presentations. This morning, Brian will be giving a presentation on charting a course in a sea of change, so appropriate for where we are today. So I'm thrilled to welcome Brian Gora.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to Dunwoody for having me here today. I'm very excited to be here. Let me get this ready. Okay. So as Brian said, we're going to talk today about charting a course in a sea of change, and certainly the sea is tumultuous these days. All of the things that are going on around us probably feels pretty rough, as if you were sailing in the waters as shown in this picture today. But interestingly, as we talk about change, one of my favorite sayings comes from the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. And he said, the only thing that is constant is change. So while we're feeling all this change, and it's a lot right now, the reality of life is change is constant. Change is around us all the time. The world is dynamic. The environment is dynamic. And so we have to think about, while all these things are happening, that this is really the norm, maybe a little more exaggerated than sort of everyday life, but certainly change is the norm. Another person from our past, Charles Darwin, probably one of the most misquoted folks out there, said that it's not about the most intelligent or the strongest. And most people say he said that the survival of the fittest. He didn't say that. What he said was the species that survives is the one that's most adaptable to change. So if change is constant, we must learn to adapt if we're going to survive. And so as we think about the world we're in today, let's talk about some of the things we can do to adapt to all these different changes that are going on. The problem is with human beings and our human nature is that we don't like change. Change is hard, and it's hard because it involves mostly the unknown. People like stability, they like familiarity, and unfortunately change is none of those things, right? And so what happens is when faced with change, we often resist change or deny that the change is happening. That's not real. Let's not talk about it. Or quite frankly, sometimes just downright refuse. I'm not doing it, even though it's obvious that there's a change that needs to be made. And so because of this, we have a conflict, right? We have change being constant and the need to adapt, and yet we're resisting it with sort of every ounce of our being, depending on what it is. Now, depending on what the change is and the person involved, sometimes maybe we're a little more accepting, but for the most part, we fight the change, and a lot of energy is put into resisting the change. But one of the things that's been said is that people that need to make a change, and let's just say individually, whatever that change might be, even a change that we know we need to make, okay, that we often will not do it unless some significant emotional event occurs that forces the change, that puts us in a situation where it is impossible for us to continue to do what we're doing, right? So let's talk a little bit about some things that have happened in the past 20 years or so that have done that have caused us, forced us, if you will, to change, and how that's impacted us and the way we sort of are as a result of this thing. So first, of course, 9/11, coming up on the 20-year anniversary of that, significant emotional event, an exogenous event, we call that, an external event, that caused us to change behaviors. And we'll talk in a minute about what some of those behaviors were. The financial crisis of 2008, significant change, right? And what happened then, and how are things different today, forever different today as a result of that? And of course, living with coronavirus now, going on, I don't know, 6 months of this here in the United States, been around longer than that in the world, and the significant changes that will forever change the landscape and how we behave. So thinking back to 9/11, some of the changes, so air travel, never the same. If you remember back in the old days, you used to be able to go all the way down to the gate and meet someone when they got off the plane. Not anymore, right? You can't even get through the front door. So all of the TSA, all of the security, all of the machines and the scanners and all that stuff forever changed air travel. And when 9/11 occurred, people were darn right afraid to fly, right? We saw terrorists, in every seat or around every corner. And so our behaviors were forced to change because of that significant event, okay? Let's talk about the financial crisis. The housing market collapsed, and no one ever predicted the housing market would collapse across the entire country. They said maybe in regions or certain markets, but the entire thing collapsed around the country. And as a result, people lost their homes, and mortgages were nearly impossible to get. The government stepped in and had major reform to the banking industry in terms of regulation. And so if you needed to get a mortgage, you probably couldn't. And if you didn't need one, you probably could. But either way, it became very, very difficult. And all of a sudden, the house, which was the cornerstone for many people's lives, was now fragile, if not gone. So significant change in how we behave. And even today, if you try to get a mortgage, it's really, really difficult, much more than it used to be. Oops, lost my thing. There it is. So let's talk about credit reporting. If you think about it, after the 2008 financial crisis, everybody has a credit report app now on their phone. We didn't have that before, but now we're looking at our credit apps. We're looking at our credit and doing something about our credit, which, again, most of us never worried about, all related to the financial markets. And of course, as we go to the coronavirus, there it is. We have social distancing. And as I was driving up today, I was thinking that's a term that probably existed prior to 2020, but I don't remember it. So maybe somebody coined it this year, but either way, it's something we use daily now, if not by the hour. A term that maybe we now know what it means, but at the beginning, what does that mean exactly? We have to sit or stand 6 feet apart. I've seen people in stores yelling at other people, get away, get away. Pretty interesting in terms of behavioral change. And then, of course, the masks, and which are now becoming an article of clothing, almost a statement, an art piece, if you will, for some folks. So very different. And look at that change in behavior. And that was very quick. In just weeks, or not, if not months, we're behaving differently. And then let's add the whole virtual discussion, right? Like today's presentation, virtual. We did some of this. This technology has been around for a long time, but now we're living it every day. And many people aren't leaving their home for days or weeks at a time. In fact, I saw an article just came up last week that REI is going remote and selling their corporate office, which they just finished, by the way. It's brand new. Because they're not going to need it anymore. And they'll probably be the first of many that will do that. So significant change in behavior. It's interesting, the company where my wife works, when she first started there, they said, she asked if she could work remotely, and they said, oh, we're not comfortable with that. And so maybe not, but let's see. Well, now, after working remotely for months, they've said, you know what, maybe you can work remotely for a lot more time than what we thought. So behaviors are changing, and they're being forced by coronavirus. But their behaviors are changing, and that's what happens when significant events occur. It affects how we think and how we behave. And but inside, I'm having trouble with my slide. Sorry. Inside all of this is a lot of anxiety and fear. Back to the unknown. Back to what's going to happen. And so some of that anxiety and fear is manifesting itself in other ways. And some of the things that we're seeing with some of the social issues and the civil disturbances today, I think, are somewhat, if not a lot, tied to this anxiety and fear. So when these things occur, like what's happening now, creates a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, but what it does do is force us to change. So now what? Now in that environment, what are we supposed to do? How do we navigate this? Do we wait and see what happens, or do we take action? Let me offer this idea. So when I was in the military's premise is that things are going to change. So no matter what the plan is or what we thought we were going to do, we always said that when the bullets start flying, we're going to need to change. And so we would plan for and assume change. And so we had this saying, adapt and overcome. A little bit like Charles Darwin. So no matter what happens, the mission must be accomplished. So we cannot just throw our hands up and say, well, we're not doing it. We have to adapt and overcome whatever the change is. So let's use that theory and apply it to our situation today. So here's 4 steps to success as we think about how to navigate this. The first is, when facing change, you have 2 options. You can, as we said before, resist and deny, and you can refuse, or you can embrace. And so the first step is we must embrace change. Stop putting all this energy into fighting it. Put energy into embracing it. Accept it. We may not like it, and I'm not suggesting that we will. In fact, we may be very unhappy about it, but we have to embrace it. Now, it doesn't mean we embrace all of it, but we embrace at least the concept that things are going to change. So then we can start to think about, what do we do? And when we embrace, that changes our mindset to a positive forward look versus a backward look, or a treading water look, or a feel of waiting for something to happen. And now let's talk about leadership, right? Because in environment of change, if you're out there and you're a leader of any organization, you have to lead change. So the leader doesn't just get to embrace, the leader must lead. The leader needs to tell people, here's what we're going to do. Here's why we need to do that. And, I see a lot of talk about, we're going to get through this, or we'll get through this together. And that's great, because that's a very positive message and powerful message. But it's not enough if you're a leader. You can't just tell people it's going to be okay, because that's not good enough. In fact, there's a saying, I think I actually coined it, that said, in the absence of information, people will default to the worst case scenario for themselves. So if you don't tell them anything other than it's going to be okay, they're going to come up with a story in their head that's worst case. Well, what if it's not okay? But everybody's story is different, because it's a worst case scenario for them. And that's a bad situation if you lead an organization, because everybody's got their own idea of what's going on. So we have to step forward as leaders and say, here's what we're doing. Here's the plan. Here's where we're going, at least in the short term, so people understand, and then tell them why, so they understand. They may not agree with it, and they may not like it, but at least they understand why, and they know we're doing something as leaders. Because if we don't, again, they're going to wander and come up with their own plan. So that's step 1, embrace change, lead change. Absolute must if you're going to navigate this. Second, you have to have a plan. People say, well, how in the heck do I have a plan? I don't know what's going on. I would tell you could have a strategic plan, which would be great, but those probably all went out the window sometime around March or April. But at least have a plan, and it might be short term, it might be just for the rest of the year. It might be for the next couple of weeks. That's okay, but have some plan and say, here's where we're going, here's the direction. And the plan might just be, let's keep everybody safe. Let's not have any incidences of infection at our facilities. So here's what we're going to do about that. Or it might say, let's talk to our customers or our suppliers and see how they're doing and what impact it might have on us, on our organization, or our students, or whatever. But have a plan and communicate that. Again, if you don't say anything, people will make up their own plan. And then once you have a plan, however simple the plan might be and however short term it might be, you got to have some goals. You got to have something you're shooting for within that plan. So call 50% of our customers, or talk to X number of students, or do X number of things by the end of the week, right? Put these things in place, get so many hand sanitizers, whatever it is. And it may sound silly, but having a plan and some goals gives people something to focus on. And again, the brain, when it has something to focus on, is much happier, and you do a lot better emotionally than if you're just sitting there worrying about all your problems with nothing to think about except the problems. So have a plan and have some goals in the plan so people can see where we're going and what we're trying to achieve. But the good news is you can change them. No plan is ever perfect or permanent, so don't try to make it that way. Just make something that'll work for now and then adjust on the fly. I used to say, get close and go. And that's really where we are in this environment, is get something and go with it and then adjust. So step 2, have a plan, have some goals. Step 3, make a backup plan. Military is probably the best I've ever seen at this, because we knew the plans were going to change. So as soon as we got done writing the plan, we made a backup plan. Here's what we're going to do when the first plan doesn't work, right? And sometimes we had a backup to the backup. And we would brief that and review that and sometimes actually run that plan just in case we needed to. This works for business and it works for you in your personal life. Have a backup plan. What if I lose my job? Or what if I don't get the job I'm trying to get? Or what if my kids don't go to school? All of those things, what do I do? It's a what if thing, but it's very powerful and it helps, again, you think about things versus wait till they happen and then have to be in crisis. It also gives you something to do to focus your energy so you're not sitting around worrying about all your problems. Harvard Business Review just had a podcast, I want to say it was a week or so ago, on future proofing your strategy with scenario planning. Same concept, scenario planning, contingency planning, very similar concepts, but look at the bottom. It's a conversation on scenario planning lessons from the Coast Guard, from the military. So if you don't know how to do this, find somebody from the military and they can help you with it. But it's a powerful tool. Step 3 in the process, have a backup plan. Again, doesn't have to be elaborate, doesn't have to be that detailed, but just think through. Here's a couple of what ifs. What if the factory closes? What if we can't get certain parts or pieces? What if we can't go here or do this? What will we do? Again, it keeps us from just throwing our hands up and being in crisis, and it focuses our energy forward and toward the future and taking action versus sitting around and worrying. Last step of the process. So the other thing, the military was really good. And I know I'm using a lot of military examples, but I think because the military bases its whole operation on change, there's a lot of lessons to be learned here, especially when you're flying helicopters and you're zipping along at a couple hundred miles an hour and things change. You need to be ready for that. So the last thing the military would do is after every significant event, whether it was a mission or a training exercise or just some equipment change or something like that, we would do after action reviews. And so the final step of this process is review periodically, and it might be weekly now. Shoot, it might be daily depending on what's going on, but certainly weekly, every couple of weeks, once a month. Sit down and review the last sequence of events or the last thing that you guys did or the plan that you had. How did it go? Today, we'll review how did this go? And look at the good and the bad and be honest and say this went well, this didn't go well, or we didn't do this right and that's why it didn't go well. But we want to review these things because we can learn from them, right? And we need to, especially in an environment of dramatic change, because we don't know. There is no playbook. Somebody asked me, what should I do? I said, I wish I could tell you. Now we can look to history and see other pandemics or other crises and say, okay, well, let's learn from that. But the reality is today's situation is different. There is no playbook. There's no book of answers that says, oh, in a coronavirus, here's what you do. This is new. It's novel, right? So we got to learn. And so the only way to learn is to review the stuff that just happened or the things that we just did and learn. And then the final step of this is we got to take some action. So don't just learn and go, yeah, that was bad. Let's not do that again. Okay, what are we going to do differently the next time so that that doesn't recur? Or at least we minimize or mitigate it to a degree so that it's not as bad. And so apply those actions. And again, probably the biggest takeaway, if you don't write anything down from this, write that down. Take action. I keep talking about how action frees the mind and focuses on doing something positive or at least future or forward looking, as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror or sitting around and worrying about all our issues. So review what happened, learn from it, and then take some action to change something in what you're doing. And it might be, again, something that was out of your control, but okay, let's do something about it. Because if we don't, we're going to be just a victim of the situation as opposed to doing something to change our course. Okay. The other thing is why? So you might be listening and saying, well, of course, that's all intuitive. It's obvious. So why don't we do all that stuff? It's because of fear. Back to the very beginning. We fear change. We fear the unknown. We don't know what to do. And fear is a powerful motivator in the negative direction. It can cause us to inaction. I've gone out and taken over businesses that were in trouble. And when I did, I would ask the people there, what's wrong? And in every case, they could tell me, well, this problem with this product or this situation in the, this part of the group or this whatever industry or this market or whatever it was. They had the answer. I said, okay, well, what are you doing about it? Nothing. We're talking about it. We're reading about it. We're looking into it. That's not action, right? And when businesses fail, every time I've been I've been to a business that has failed, or I've been asked to go in and look at a business that has failed. In every case, it's not that the people did the wrong things; it's they did nothing. There's a great quote, and I want to read it to you. So let me get it here. Teddy Roosevelt, former president, said, "In the moment of decision, The best thing you can do is the right thing, of course. The next best thing is the wrong thing. The worst thing is nothing. So in this moment, in this day, in these days, in this year of massive change, we have to do something, whether we're leaders or individuals, organizations, or in your personal life. Do something. Transform that fear or that inaction into action to do something, even if it's just today, or even if it's just this week, because that will change your mind, it change your focus, change your emotion onto something you can do, and it gets you looking forward as opposed to looking backwards and being afraid or worrying. So in summary, to chart a course in this sea of tumultuous change, embrace and lead change. Embrace it, accept it, it's going to be there. Fighting it will do nothing except to consume a lot of energy that could be better used to move forward. And if you're a leader, you've got to lead it. Stand up and say, we're going to change. Here's why we're changing, and here's what we're going to do, even if it's just this week. Have a plan and goals. Here's the plan for the week, or here's the plan for the month. And here's some of the things we want to try to accomplish during that period of time. Doesn't have to be specific, doesn't have to be beautiful. Just here's some things we want to try to do to give folks something to focus on and to know what we want to accomplish. Do contingency planning. Make a backup plan in case the plan doesn't work. And that's even more critical right now because it is so dynamic. We're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. We thought it was going to be over by now. It's not. And so have a contingency plan just in case. Again, not elaborate, just something simple, a few what if scenarios just in case. And then finally review each week or each month what you did, what happened, what we learned from it, and then take action on that. Make a new plan, make some new goals, do some more contingency planning, and just get in the circle, right? But it starts with embracing and leading the change. If you don't do that, none of this matters. If you do this, having a plan or contingency planning, and do it in a way that's hesitant or unsure, people will see that and they're not going to believe anything. So you've got to embrace and lead it first, then do these other things. Right. So here's the question for all of you. And normally when I see people in person, I would ask people to raise their hands, but I can't do that today unless you're typing in a question. But in addition to questions, if you want to share, what will you do differently today? You have an ocean of opportunities to do something different, or you can just stay where you are, wherever that is. And maybe you're doing all these things that I talked about today. And if you are, great. If you're not, what can you take away from this and do differently today to change your situation for yourself or for your organization? Push yourself and move forward versus kind of stay where you are and be stuck. All right, at this point, we're going to take questions. So I'm going to switch over here and find the question and answer block. Okay. So I have a question here that says, how do you deal with people who are afraid of change? So, as an individual, that's kind of hard. If you're a leader of an organization and you have folks in your organization who are afraid and they're saying, I'm really fearful of this thing. Let's say you come out and say, here's what we're going to do. And they go, oh, that's terrible. I don't want to do that. I'm scared to death. Part of the way to solve that is to talk about the why. Again, they may not like it and they may not agree, but at least they'll understand it. And understanding is critical to action. If you just run off and do things without understanding, that's actually a liability. So explain the why, right? And then encourage to do something. Don't just say, just get on board. Don't, things like that don't help, but say, let's try it. Let's do this. Let's take a step and see where we get to. We don't have to do the whole thing, but we got to take some baby steps, but we have to do something, because if we do nothing, we're going to be stuck here. Right. There's a great quote from the movie Apollo 13. I'm kind of a movie buff for quotes. And if you remember when they're in the capsule, if you've seen that, and they're arguing about, did he stir the tank? Did he check the tank? And Tom Hanks, Jim Lovell's character, said, we can bounce off the walls for the next 20 minutes and we'll be right back here with the same problems. Solve the problem. So one of the things we can talk about is, instead of being fearful, let's focus on the problem, work the issue, not all of the reasons that we're afraid. So, but don't force people, because that's the worst thing you can do. That'll just make it worse. So I have a question here. It says, what are the biggest challenges facing business today? That's a great question. It kind of depends on which business you're in. If you're in the hospitality industry, your biggest challenge is that no one wants to come to your location potentially, or you can only operate at partial capacity, or you can't get things that you need. I would say in my business, one of the biggest challenges we're seeing is a supply of parts and pieces. I think everyone throttled back because we weren't sure what was going to happen with supply chain and with Corona. And now as demand is starting to pick up, people are falling behind. So that's a big issue. Obviously, there's a lot of fear. People don't necessarily want to go in to the office or go out still, and they're not sure, and it depends on what part of the country you're in. But also with the civil unrest, I was out doing some around the country with my business, and in cities where there was a lot of civil unrest, and I can tell that's a big challenge for business. Do I open if I'm in a place where some of that's going on? Here in Minneapolis, I know a lot of stores aren't opening or restaurants aren't opening because they're not sure. So the challenges are different. It really depends on your industry. Some industries are fine. If you talk to folks in certain industries, I have a friend of mine that's an electrician. He said he's got business all over the place because people are finding problems in their home. The home improvement folks are doing great because people are at home, so they have lots of stuff to do. So I think it's this fear and anxiety. I really do. I think it's the thing that's holding us back and keeping us from moving forward or even trying some things because we're not sure. And so as business leaders, it comes back to leadership. We have to set the tone and say, let's do this. Let's go here. Let's try this. Let's accomplish this, and then see, and then adjust from there. So I have a question. Says, if I could select a business that has succeeded in this environment, what would it be? You know, as I think about it, and of course, a lot of it's on television now because it's hard to get out and around. But all of the people who are either in the business or who got into the business of personal protective equipment, you know, the face masks and all of the stuff to support the frontline workers. Look at that. Talk about adapting to change. I mean, there are people who, you know, I know 3M was out there and others, but I know lots of friends of mine that have businesses that are making things or providing support. I know people that went out and brought food to folks and did things. So there are a lot of businesses that saw this need, whether it's ventilators or other equipment to support people who are fighting coronavirus, or at least on the front lines, and adjusted. It's very similar if you think about it. If those of you who are history buffs go back to World War II, where a lot of companies started making things for the war effort. It's very similar. It's kind of the war effort here on coronavirus. But I think there's a lot of people, not just in industry specifically, but businesses that said, hey, we can do that. Let's build those things and adjust our production to help that. Even if they had demand for their regular products, this was something that's necessary to help. So I think that's a great example of doing something as opposed to doing nothing and either letting someone else do it or worrying about what you should do. I think that the hospitality industry, at least those who could do, delivery or carry out, even those that weren't doing it, they adjusted. I know there's restaurants around me that didn't normally have carryout, said, hey, we're going to have carryout out the back door. So call us up and place an order and we'll pick it up. And then we did car delivery, and then we had the curbside delivery. I was traveling and I had a big trailer and I couldn't go through a drive-through. So I walked up to a restaurant and ordered on the phone and stood in the curb delivery. And they said, what spotty? And I said 2, and they came out and there was no car there, it was just me. So there are examples of people adapting to this and adjusting, quickly. And that's great. And that's the point, is do something. And then if that doesn't work, do something else. So some great examples. Let me see if there's any others that I missed here. So I see one here. It says, today I will be more intentional about seeking to learn more about, this is what am I going to do today? Great. I will be more intentional about seeking to learn more about others' thoughts or intentions to find opportunities or solutions I may not have been thinking about. Concurrently, it would help me to know what kinds of fears or concerns are lurking. Great. When people seem fearful, they may not say it. So ask them, what is it that not what are you afraid of necessarily, although you can ask that, but what are your concerns? What is it that's bothering you? What is it that's troubling you about this plan or about what's going on? And it might just be, I just don't know. I'm just afraid, right? Okay, well, let's take a step, or let's do this. But that's a great point, is ask some more questions, listen, talk to folks, especially, and if it's virtual, then fine. And just, if you can sense that, and usually you can, say, hey, it seems like you're struggling a little bit with this idea or with this direction or with just stuff in general. Tell me more about that. Sometimes you may have to do that a little privately as opposed to in front of other folks, depending on what it is. So be careful of that. Great comment. And then I have one here. How radically different from the main plan should the contingency plan be? Great question. It depends on what if, right? So if you say, let's say we have a plan to, I'll use an example of a restaurant. Okay, we're going to open at the end of next week, and we're going to have this many tables and this many servers and so forth. So here's our plan. All right, well, what if people don't come? Or what if we can't get enough servers and people don't want to come in? So in that case, it would be, all right, well, do we shrink down the number of tables? Do we do double shifts? So it kind of depends on your what if scenario of what you think is likely. If what's likely is what if nobody shows up? That's pretty dramatic. Then the backup plan would be, okay, well then if after day one or after the first 3 hours, we're going to immediately start, calling people, or we're going to immediately start advertising takeout, or maybe we wait for a day and see what happens. So it kind of depends on what your plan is, but it's okay if it's pretty dramatic, because it might be a hard left or a hard right if no one shows up, or if we can't get something that we need for our business. We may have to do something pretty drastic. So you don't want to get crazy with it, but again, it's a backup, so you may never have to use it, but some of those crazy what ifs will be helpful even if you have to implement part of it. Great question. Let's see, did I get them all? Okay, wait, I've got one here. It said, I didn't let people go or lay off because I didn't think I could do the job. Fear. Can you talk about how everyone is replaceable? How does the military train for this? Great question. So the military side of it's a little harder because everyone's replaceable, because they may get killed, and maybe obviously they're not there. So what the military does, which is really good, is we train down to the lowest level of the organization so that everyone knew the job of the person above them. So if I was the leader, the person that reported to me, they knew what I was going to do and what my job was. The other thing the military did that was really good was we had standard operating procedures. So everybody knew how we were going to do it. So if something went wrong, we didn't start making things up. We just did it the way we were supposed to, but the next person in charge would step in, right? And that easy to do in the civilian world, because you don't have the dramatic events that occur in the military typically. So yes, we are all ultimately replaceable, even if we have a lot of specific knowledge. The key for business is knowledge capture. So if you have somebody on your team who knows a lot about something and they're a single point failure, as we say, make sure somebody else knows some of that stuff, so that if they get sick or they can't come in, you're not completely down. So it's kind of two ways to look at it, but it's make sure that I'd start with no single point failure, and then share the plan and share what each person's role in the plan is, so that if somebody can't make it or they're not there, somebody else knows what was supposed to happen. And then I think I have one more here. It says, can you give us an example of a time you successfully implemented a major change within a company? Wow, there's so many of those. I'll give you one. So I took over a business actually here in Minnesota, and it was a very successful business, but we wanted to make it more successful. We felt there was more opportunity. And so when I got in there, one of the things that I found was we were not doing enough continuous improvement, the lean toolkit, if you will, the Six Sigma things. We were doing some, but we weren't doing enough. And so even though the business was very successful, I came in and put in some radical changes to increase the volume of activity to find efficiencies in the business. And at first, of course, people said, we don't need to do that. We're fine. The business is fine. We're doing great. We're profitable, and we're successful. And so we don't want to do it. We don't think we need to. And I said, well, we're going to do it because there's opportunity here to find some more efficiency. And so we set some goals, and there are a few people that resisted, but we worked through all of that. And the result, of course, was we dramatically improved the business, improved profitability, improved our delivery to customers, because this tool set is so powerful. So, but we had to fight some of that resistance and convince people, explain the why, and in some cases say, well, this is where we're going, and we'd really like you to be on board. If you're not going to be on board, then we'll have to do something different. And I think that might have been the last one. Did I get them all? Wait. Oh, I see one more. One of the most surprising outcomes of the coronavirus is this question of personal freedom. How do you approach the change and implementation from the for the greater good when individual freedom is resistant to this philosophy? That's tough. I mean, we all like our freedoms. We don't want to be told, you have to wear a mask. At the same time, what I guess what I would offer is this: is the thing you're resisting because you just it's just you, or is there a real valid reason why you don't want to do it? And if it is for the greater good and it's not a dramatic impact on you, can you get on board with this, the mask thing or whatever it might be, versus fight it? Now, if you can give me a really good reason why you think it affects your personal freedoms, then we can talk about that. But this situation, none of us like it, and we can all have, well, the CDC says this and the government says that, and I think this and I read that. But at the end of the day, is it really hurting you to wear a mask? It's kind of a pain. But if that's helping the greater good, then let's do that. Other things, I don't know. It's tough. This is a different situation, and yes, we all feel like we've been kind of told by others what we can and can't do, where we can and can't go. But at the end of the day, is it that big a deal? Can you get on board with it? At least somewhat, as opposed to just fighting it. And more importantly, what can we do differently? So if you don't like the mask, can we get a different mask? Can we get a face shield? Can we get something that works better for you? And I'm using the mask example, whatever the situation is. I think that the issue is, let's not argue about it to impasse. Let's find a solution somewhere in the middle between where you are and where we or I am, so that we can both kind of move along and move forward, because resistance and refusal gets us nowhere, just arguing. And that's a lot of wasted energy. All right. I know we have them keep coming in, but I don't want to run over time here. So I think, am I okay to keep going, guys? Am I? Okay. Let's see. Okay, I have one more here. It says, do you have any advice for creating a plan and a backup plan when you know too little about the situation to predict multiple scenarios? Great question. Yeah, the I don't know what if, right? But when you do the what if, it's more of a brainstorming, just what could go wrong. So get your team on the phone or on a video like this and say, okay, guys, what could go wrong? Here's our plan. We're going to do X things in the next month. What could go wrong with that? And just think of all the things. And it sounds kind of silly, but what could happen? Here's an interesting story. So back when bird flu was a thing, H1N1, I was part of a very large organization. And so we got a group of folks together, and we were asked to put together a backup plan, a scenario plan. And so we sat in a room and said, all right, what if we can't open a factory? What if we have to close down a whole factory because so many people get sick? Or what if critical parts can't arrive because our supplier they had to close their factory because they got sick? Or what if we can't have food service in our facilities because of some issue with bird flu? So how do we feed people? Or what if people can't drive for some reason? Or so we went through. Does any of that sound familiar, by the way, to today? This was then, and we put all these scenarios together. We didn't know what would happen. Interestingly, by the way, we briefed it to the board, and the board laughed and said, "Oh, that'll never happen." So I don't know if they pulled that plan out in coronavirus, because they probably some good stuff in there. But we didn't know what we didn't know, but we guessed at what could go wrong. And some of it was a little far-fetched. What if we lose a whole factory? But that happened. Whole factory shut down. What do you do? Where do people go? Can you work remotely? What are security issues in aerospace and defense? What are the ITAR and some of the other kinds of, we were had clearances in our facility. So what do we do about that, right? So, and then there's the whole knowledge thing. So I think it's just a what if. Just sit back and brainstorm. What could go wrong? And again, not will it, or do I think it will, or that's silly, but just what could go wrong? And if that happened, what would we do? I don't want to get crazy, but at the same time, a couple of crazy ones are probably not bad, because we've seen crazy here in coronavirus, I think, of things that nobody would have predicted. With 1 day notice, all the restaurants are closing, or 2 days notice. Nobody would have done a what if for that. That happened. So it's a little crazy. So I think it's just brainstorm what crazy stuff could happen and what might we do. And if we don't know what we'll do, then just say, okay, well, can we address part of it? Can we just mitigate or minimize the impact as opposed to solve, because we may not be able to solve. I hope that helps. Got one here. It says, on the topic of racial inequality, have you adapted your business principles to take on the issue? Pause, listen, learn, and act feels similar to your advice in step 4. Yeah, you know, that advice applies to anything, right? To fear, the whole issue with racial injustice and inequality, and you know, gender bias, and you know, age discrimination, and all of those things we wrestle with in our personnel environment and so forth. And I will tell you that yes, and it's, even though we might think we adapt and we do that, I would offer we can always do better. We can always do a better job listening. To the question that was asked before about, you know, if somebody's fearful, I need to listen and try to understand what they're afraid of. Ask the question, hey, it seems like you're struggling with this, or seems like you're bothered by this, or, you know, do you feel like you're not getting treated equally, and those kind of things. I'm sensing some concerns there, right? It's hard because we have a lot of different constituents, a lot of cultures, you know, in our organizations today, and we have to think of all of those and at least be mindful of them, not necessarily solve every one. And we don't want to discriminate when we try to solve either by showing favoritism to one group, because then we just create a problem with another group. So we got to be careful there as business leaders. But yes, great advice. Listen, you know, learn from that, ask questions, ask people, you know, how they're feeling about things, because remember, whether you agree with their feelings or not, how they feel is real to them. And so we need to appreciate that and accept that, and then get our team together and say, okay, what can we do about that? So that's a tough one, you know. But it's not new. It's not a new problem. None of these problems are new. All these things are something we've wrestled with before. Today, they're kind of all coming at us at once, maybe. But the racial injustice or inequality, or however we want to characterize it, is not a new issue. So there's some things we can learn about how we dealt with it or did a better job with it in the past. But I really like the point. Yes, listen and learn. I have a question of inspiration for the term conversion-omics. You know, I didn't come up with it. Actually, the owner came up with that. The idea was started out as a sales training organization, so converting prospects into sales, and the economics of that. So kind of put those two together, and that's what conversion-omics is converting sales to improve economics. Another question here. Wow, that's great. Is there a balance I've seen between implementing, planning, and structure? Could there be too much structure and planning that limits innovation? Great question. You know, you're going to find that even in innovation, you can have a plan, you can have some structure. One of the biggest challenges is with very creative folks who say, well, I just come up with stuff, and engineers like to have a blank sheet of paper. But there is structure that we can reuse that makes it more efficient. And so we found over the years that we were more innovative when we had some structure, because we could apply our innovative energy, our creative energy, in the place where we could really be creative. But the stuff that didn't need to be redone, if you could, we could reuse some of the pieces of it. Well, let's do that. And then we could put more energy into certain parts of creativity as opposed to every single aspect of it, because then it became sort of we're all over the place. So yes, can there be too much structure? Sure. Can there be too much red tape? Sure. But I don't think the flip side of that is if you have no structure or very little structure, then everybody's kind of all over the place. So structure is good. Structure, it gives us, we know what everybody's doing. It gives us the ability to have a baseline and a foundation, and then build from that and then adjust. So find happy medium in there somewhere. Don't go to extreme. You know, the balance is good. The extremes are not necessarily good, unless you're in an environment today where you may need to be very creative with some things, and ask that maybe that's part of your backup plan. What if we went off and did this kind of wild thing? Maybe that's part of your contingency planning. All right, I think I might be out of time. Let me see if there's one more. Otherwise, did I get them all? I think maybe I did. Yeah. Boy, I hope so. Oh, here's one I didn't get. One more. It says, what are some of the changes in the aviation what are some of the changes the aviation industry will or should change in the next few years? Wow. In all three of those exogenous events I talked about, aviation was severely impacted, unfortunately. And again, now aviation's impacted because people are afraid to fly again. So the changes, we're not going to fly people virtually. We're not going to teleport people just yet. So that's not going to happen. Aviation goes up and down based on demand and volume. And again, aviation is doing that. I guess probably one of the biggest changes is, like everybody, how do we make people feel safe in airports and on airplanes? Masks and cleanliness, and I get things from different airlines about how they're doing things to clean the aircraft and all of that. We have to make people feel safe, or fear will take over and they won't fly. They won't even go in the airport because they're afraid. So I think other organizations, malls and sporting events and all that are wrestling with the same issues. So to get people back in airplanes, we got to address the fear of getting sick or the fear of something happening, and we have to keep working on that. And that's a tough one because it's hard to do on such a macro scale. But we got to find solutions, and there might be different things that, whether it's air quality or sanitization or all of those things. But to get people back on airplanes, we got to help them be comfortable flying again, which is a tall order. So I think I'll turn it back to Brian at this point, as we're closing in at the end of our session here, and let him wrap us up.
Great. Thank you, Brian, for your time this morning and kicking off our lead speaker series, and a very impactful, inspiring message this morning. And thank you for taking time to address our community with your insights on the sea of change and all we're navigating right through at this time. I want to thank all the attendees for joining us this morning and being part of our lead speaker series. And hopefully it was as informative for you as it was for me. Please join us next month and invite your friends to the next lead speaker. On Thursday, October 1st, will be Mike Walbrink, who's the president of Azul, which is a cybersecurity company. And Mike and Azul are national leaders in the world of cybersecurity, and look forward to a great session next month as well. Again, thank you, Brian, for your time this morning, and thank you for all attending, and everybody have a great day today.